Hey, this is Tom McElroy with WildSurvivalSkills.com. In this video, I'm going to head out into the Sonoran Desert for a week and document the crucial steps I take to show you how you would live out here in full survival. Alright, my first step is to get out of this area. Right now I'm under full sun exposure. It's early morning, so that doesn't matter so much. But before it gets to have, sun right overhead, I need to get up and into these canyons so that I can get some shade and potentially find some water. Okay, here we go. I've got my shelter. This is my favorite one because it doesn't have any rodent material inside, not much evidence animals are using it, a small entryway that I can close off, and a fairly small cave that I can heat up pretty easily. Also, there's a ton of material nearby, a bunch of rocks 10 feet away in a dry stream bed, and so it's not going to take me too much energy to carry those up here and seal off this section. It's really windy today, and I bet it's going to be super windy tonight. The temperature fluctuates between 95 and 45 at night, so I've got to worry about the heat in the day, but I can't forget that it's going to get cold tonight. For this type of shelter to work, I don't have any insulation inside. There really isn't that much to help hold my body heat in, so I need a fire. Luckily for me, deserts are some of the easiest environments to get a fire going. All right, so like I said, there's a dry creek bed just down below, so I've collected a bunch of rocks, got them all piled up here so I can put this together really quickly. I just want to seal off the entryway. As I was walking up here, I already saw snakes. I saw a Gila monster. So anything I can do to discourage rodents and animals from coming in here. I also want to block the wind. So I'm going to build up the entryway, close it off as much as possible, just so that I can sneak in and out, and it'll even actually hold in some of the heat. So I'm just going to throw a bunch of rocks up here and call it good. All right, so this isn't rocket science. I piled up a bunch of rocks. I need to make sure it's really sturdy, try to fill in all the gaps, maybe throw a bunch of dirt in there. If I had clay, I would. Mostly though, this is gonna be a wind barrier, and it's gonna help hold in a little bit of the heat and reflect the firelight while I'm in that shelter. And with a small fire, I'm gonna stay really warm in there. All right, so what I've got here is the skeleton of a saguaro cactus. And in lower areas like this, where we don't have very much agave and yucca for making hand drill, this is a fantastic hand drill. So I can break off this skeleton, one of these little ribs, and this becomes a really good hand drill. I can just spin one against the other, and it's gonna work and get me a coal. Sun's going down, time to get going. What I'm gonna do is just flatten out this bigger piece of saguaro, this rib of a saguaro plant. It's gonna be my fireboard. As I'm carving, I'm just kind of feeling it, just finding a spot that feels like it's nice and solid, not rotten or anything like that. This whole thing's pretty good, and I don't need this much. Okay, I'm gonna square it off so it's just flat on top, 90-degree edge on the side, flat on bottom. And now I've got my thinner saguaro rib that I'm going to use for the hand drill, the drilling section of this thing. Now, saguaro ribs aren't always perfectly round. More often than not, they're kind of like little rectangular. And so I think my hands can handle it, but just at the base here, I'm just going to make sure it's as round as possible. A lot of times I'll just take a gritty stone and just sand it. And just by rubbing on the edges, the square edges, you round it all out. All right, next thing I'm gonna do is just point the end of this thing. It's a solid piece of wood, so I just point the end, put a little divot. Right in there, and that's my setup. Whew. All right, well, it's a tight shelter, but that's the idea. There's definitely a lot of really nice overhangs out there that hopefully, I'm going to spend most of the time in the day in those and just sleep in here at night. I've started to collect some leaves and some creosote and all that, and that'll make a nice bed. Hopefully it'll keep some bugs away, maybe a snake. And I definitely got to stock up more and just put in as much as I can and just bear with the smell of the creosote. So, all right, I've got my hand drill. It was getting a little windy out there, so decided to bring it on in here. Last thing you want is to make a hand drill and then the wind comes and knocks your formed coal out from underneath you. And so this is the hand drill, tall spindle, and it's nice and straight. And basically to make friction, it's the same thing as everything. It's pressure and speed. So if I spin it really quickly between my hands while I'm pushing down on it, creating pressure down at the base here, that should do it. So having the right combination of pressure and speed for the right materials, that should get a fire going. So what you can do is spin it between your hands. Just get warmed up. Don't kill yourself in the beginning, putting all your strength into it. And eventually you're gonna push down real hard. And when you do that, your hands are probably gonna go down. So it's smoking already real good, so that's a good sign. I'm just gonna speed up a little bit, build up the heat, so I don't just kick out all the dust. Just give it a little burst at the end. All right, so I think I burned through my saguaro stalk, so hopefully it's there. Still smoking, just barely hanging on though. I'm not even gonna touch it, I'm just gonna let it sit for a second. Just maybe fan some air into it. You can see it's just now starting to catch on. It just had a tiny spark in there. I got lucky because I burned through the baseboard, so I couldn't have gone any further. All right, I'm gonna make sure all of it's on this wood chip, really let it grow and let it smoke on its own. You don't wanna rush this part, there's plenty of time. Better to let that heat and that red coal start to grow before you throw it in your tinder bundle. All right, so I've got it on a little wood chip. You can see it's glowing real nice. I'm gonna put it right into the best part of my tinder bundle, the part that's really fluffed up and dry. Hopefully the whole thing is, but there's always one little section that's awesome. I wrap it up like an egg in a bird's nest, kind of let it sit for just a second, let that heat gather, and then I'm gonna blow on it. Now I've got my fire made behind me, so I'm gonna have to do some quick switcheroo, but for the camera's sake, I'll try to hold out as long as I can. As it smokes more and glows more, I can blow harder. Whew. It's starting to burn my fingers. All right, so like I said, got my fire pit back here. I'm just gonna put it in there just before it explodes into flame. All right, this is taking its time. Not sure why. Please, please, please. Yeah, I've never had this happen this bad. All right, so struggling. Oh, there we go. Man, I guess my tinder wasn't good enough. Normally in the desert, things light up so quick. Man, you never know. When you turn a camera on, things tend to go wrong. But it's all worked out. Gonna be nice and cozy in here. It's really starting to take off now. I just want to build it small in the beginning. Make sure it's well ventilated. It does seem like the draft is pulling it out that way. And just going to slowly build it bigger, try to get a hot base of coals, and eventually make a little rock wall so that it really does vent out and doesn't smoke up the entire shelter. But it's a relief. Had me panic there for a second, it wasn't gonna go. But here we go. Got a nice little fire. I'm gonna be able to kick back on my bed here, lay down, and stay really warm throughout the night. It's a nice, cozy, warm shelter, ventilating super well, and it's toasty in there. I really don't have to have a very big fire going. All right, so it was definitely pretty cold last night. Just now waking up, and the sun is just getting over the horizon, and this is the time to find water. I need to make sure I don't get dehydrated. Water is #1 priority today. I pretty much have to find water today or this is over. To check yourself, you can pinch the skin on the back of your hand. If it snaps back into place really well, this is not. If it snaps right back to where it was, that means you're not dehydrated, but if it slowly goes back, then you're probably pretty dehydrated. So check yourself, check your urine, make sure it's clear. But I need to get out there and find some sort of water. And last night went pretty good. I stayed warm-ish. The problem was I'd fall asleep, fire would kind of dim down, and then I'd get some sleep, wake up, have to restock it, and then just do it over and over. And so I only got a couple, 3 or 4 hours of sleep or something. That's the way the desert is. There just isn't much or any insulative plants out here that don't have thorns in them. So it's really just going to be stalking a fire and trying to sleep in between. I did put hot rocks in the fire, little flat hot rocks, and I'd pull them underneath me in the middle of the night to kind of radiate some heat up at me. Problem is that only lasts like an hour, hour and a half with these rocks. So I just have to switch them out. But yeah, I'll have to find water before the sun really starts coming down. Alright, so my best strategy at this point to find water is to get above the landscape. Take a look and try to find areas where in these arroyos there's really green areas over here where it's just super condensed green. There's a lot of Palo Verde trees or willow trees in areas like this, and that might be my best area for getting water. Obviously straight down in the middle of the desert where it's not very green, everything's kind of pale, I know that's not a good spot, so I need to head up into some of these arroyos and try to find a really good source. Alright, I scored here. I've got some clay, and I can just tell by looking at the texture of the soil, and then I kind of take it and spit on it and mash it around, and it's got good elasticity. It's definitely not the greatest, so it might need to be purified, but from this I can make a clay pot, I can boil water, possibly even I could make a canteen so that when I'm walking out of here, I can take water with me. This cactus here is the subject of probably the biggest survival myth on the planet. This is a barrel cactus. And you've probably been told before that if you cut a barrel cactus open, you can just drink the water out of it. It's a huge myth. It does not work. One, I have no idea how in the world I'm going to chop this in half without an axe or a machete. And two, it's full of oxalic acid. And when you do finally start chewing it up, it makes your mouth pucker, and it's really bad for your system. So you're not going to get water out of a barrel cactus like you've seen in the movies. The good thing that I can get out of this are these fruits. At this time of year, this is the one cactus that's really fruiting, and so this is going to be a staple food for me out here. But what I can do is just take these fruits, and these guys are just slightly early, but they still taste pretty good. They have a very kind of sour taste to them. But the yellow part is very edible. Green part might just be a little ripe right now. And that's a super good edible. It doesn't have thorns on it or glochids or anything that you need to worry about. And so barrel cactus is one of my favorite foods out here right now. Another thing to note, that when you look inside, there's a ton of seeds. Those actually chew up fairly well, and so you can just eat those seeds. There's proteins and little bits of oil in there, so really good stuff for you. Barrel cactus is going to be my staple, and there's a ton of it out here. Alright, so I've been digging holes everywhere, trying to unearth water in these dry creek beds, and I'm not really coming up with much. I just found this puddle here. It's just this one little puddle, and the bees and flies are all over it right now, which tells me it's probably not the greatest. It might be just really stagnant and contaminated. And so last resort, I can use this and purify it. But what I'm gonna go do is go down the dry creek bed just slightly and start digging a really big hole until I hit water. All right, the biggest thing to remember is that in the desert, you're not always gonna find water, especially in the dry season. This is post-wet season, so I'm doing pretty good right now. But there's times where your only play is to travel in the mornings and evenings and get yourself out of this situation, because you're not gonna find water, and without water in the desert, you're not gonna live. This for me is gonna allow me to stay here. Hopefully I can find a pure source though. All right, so I'm down the creek bed a bit and digging up with my digging stick, making a hole, and I'm starting to hit damp soil, which is a great sign that that water actually is just traveling underground a little bit and I can dig it out. This is a really good sign, even if it doesn't work out here because of the rocks. I'm sure it'll work out in a different area. So I'm gonna keep digging. The problem is once you get deeper than about 12 inches, you dig and all the sand just fills your hole back in. And so I'm just gonna have to find a really good area where the water's really at the surface. So I'm gonna look around, try to find a low-lying area, maybe with some without as many rocks in it, and dig up that water. Now this water doesn't, just because it's 12 inches underground, doesn't mean it's purified. That doesn't mean it's coming out of a spring. That water can still be contaminated, and I'm gonna have to purify that. All right, so I'm doing really good. Starting to hit water further down here. So I'm just gonna dig this out, and it's pretty murky, but hopefully if that settles after I've dug, then this is gonna be a really good source of water. All right, what I need to do now to purify this water is to boil it. So what I'm gonna do is rock boil it in some clay. I don't have time to burn out a wooden bowl, and there's not much going on here. I think if I didn't have the clay, I might try to go for a century plant and make a container out of that really quick and see if I can boil. But this works really good in a pinch, and at least in the beginning, it's gonna be great. Over time, I could see this being a pain, but I've got some of the less pure clay that I dug out of the ground, and it's super gritty, but that doesn't matter, so it's great for this type of project. What I'm gonna do is just mash it up as much as I can, and I'm just gonna make a dish out of it. Now, it hasn't been fired, it's not pottery, but clay still isn't very porous, and so it's gonna hold water. The only thing I need to do is support it. So, what I can do is dig out a dish into the ground, the size of a large silver bowl. You can see this soil is damp too. So I'm going to dig this out, put the water in here, but now the structure of this hole that I've formed here is going to support the clay, and then the clay is going to hold the water for long enough to boil. I've had them hold the water for a solid hour or two before it all kind of went through, so it gives you plenty of time to make a fire, throw hot rocks in there, and boil it up. So that's my plan. So what I need to do now is just make a really nice round disc, really pound this clay together. And while this stuff isn't the greatest, it's pretty good. So definitely going to be attempting some pottery later with the better stuff and see what I can do. Okay, so once I have this disc shape, I'm going to thin it out, get it as big as possible, line this hole, and then just smooth out the inside of the clay as much as possible so there's no cracks or leaks in it. Alright, so what I did here was to make a clay impression in the ground. I fired up a bunch of hot rocks in the fire, and I could just take 2 sticks, lift them out, and chuck them into this bowl. I need to raise the temperature of the water up high enough to kill all the bacteria that could potentially be in that water. On the safe side, if you bring that water to boiling, you know you're good. While boiling it in this clay impression was definitely worth it, it was a pain. Alright, after digging out this hole, I looked around and found a much better spot where there was less rocks interfering, and I was able to dig out a nice well that I could come back to every day. Alright, so having a canteen would be absolutely amazing out here. In order to do that, I can't just use this raw clay. to make a pot. It probably won't work for something super fancy, and I don't want to take any chances. So I'm going to grind up this clay and purify it, and then I can make something really nice out of it. My routine every day was to go out into the desert, collect and gather as many things as I needed. During the hottest part of the day, I'd spend it hiding out in this overhang. The first few days, this meant purifying a ton of clay. Alright, so most people will tell you to grind up pottery and either purify it by letting it water settle, which takes another bucket and a lot of time, or to grind it up, put it on a big cloth, and then let the wind kind of winnow away the finest particles because they blow a little further than the heavier things that fall. Both of those things take way too long, and I just don't have time for either one. So what I'm doing is just grinding it up as much as possible, picking out the obviously really big pieces, but then I can put it on my shirt, kind of bounce it around. And when I do that, you can see it already, how many of the big pieces and little fiber pieces come to the top. From here I can scrape away all the bigger stones and just do it again and again. Now you don't need to get everything, but you do want to have a consistent size of particle in there. To make a clay pot, you don't need 100% pure clay. You just need all the material to be about the same size with no materials that are going to blow up or crack or anything like that. So getting rid of some of the bigger pieces, and that's really going to help. So I don't have any big rocks in there that are definitely going to make it break. Before putting all the work into purifying, I wanted to test the clay, so I pinched together a couple tiny little pots and threw them into the fire. While most of them did crack a little bit, it showed that the clay has great potential. Alright, so I'm going to set up my figure 4 trap. This is a deadfall. I've jammed some wolfberries into the bait stick. I've got my rock here, and there's a bunch of rodent scat around here, so I'm thinking this is a good spot to trap. Lots of tracks. Alright, there we go. It's all set up. Looks like a little figure 4. Once the animal comes in and touches this bait stick, hopefully doesn't take much, but I really have to set it in between a point where all this wind isn't going to blow it over and set it, versus it needs to be sensitive enough for the animal. So hopefully that's the middle ground that I'm compromising on. I'm going to disguise my trail camera in right about here, and hopefully that'll do it. Alright, so I was coming up this morning and I looked at my trap and it looked like there wasn't anything in it. Maybe it had just sprung. But then I saw this little tail sticking out the side. So let's check this thing out. One guy. Sorry, buddy. So he's gotten in some scraps that his ears are all cut up. In order to clean this animal, really the big thing is you want to remove the skin and you want to remove the guts. Everything else is just bones and meat. Put your knife just underneath the skin and pull up without ever cutting into the abdominal cavity. You're going to cut straight up the belly, up the inside of each leg, and then you can peel the skin back. Surprisingly, the skin comes off pretty easily, and just pull the arms through and pull it all the way off the head. Alright, admittedly I'm doing a little bit of a sloppy job gutting this animal, but I had a few open cuts on my hands, and the last thing I wanted was to become blood brothers with a pack rat. Alright, to gut this animal, what I'm going to do is pinch the abdominal muscle. I'm going to cut just the abdominal muscle and slide my knife under it without puncturing the guts. It's hugely important that you never puncture the intestines, because that could easily spoil your meat and make you sick. From here, I continue cutting up through the rib cage all the way up to the neck. I can cut the head off at this point, work my knife the other way down, around the groin and around the anus, and pull the guts out in one package. Now I'm left with just meat and bones, and I can stick that right over the fire. Alright, like in any survival situation, you end up collecting so much stuff that you can't possibly just carry it all around in your arms. So I'm going to make a basket out of this sotol plant. It's a great plant to know. Not only does it make a great basket, but the stalk on it is fantastic for making friction fires. All right, so I've collected a bunch of sotol leaves. I removed all the thorns from the outside. Went pretty quickly, and I probably could have done it with my fingernails if I didn't have a knife. And what I'm going to do right now is make a plated basket, where it's something you probably did as a kid with popsicle sticks to lock them together in a square. And I'm just going to fold up the ends and keep going under, over, and it should make a really strong basket, as these leaves are almost unbreakable. All right, to make this kind of basket, again, it's super simple. All I need to do is start off with a few and then build out from there. But right now I'm just building the base. This is going to be a square basket. And so if I take, to start, 3 by 3, and I match one up in the middle so that it goes over, over. The next one is going to go under, over, under. Okay, just like that. And then the next one's going to go back to over, under, over. And just by doing that, we all know, locks these things together. Now as I build out, I can either kind of make it, rectangular or perfectly square. Totally up to you. And so again, next one here, going to go the opposite of the last one. And they're going to get a little messed up. You just pull them back together. Makes a real nice, strong base for this basket. Alright, so as I said, that's super simple. Just a bunch of under-overs. You can make it rectangular or perfectly square. That part's entirely up to you. All I'm going to do now is fold up these ends at a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to weave around with other sotol leaves so that it goes under, over, all around the basket. Alright, so by accident I thought I pressed record and I didn't, so I missed a little segment there, but you'll get the idea. Basically, here's the base that I started with. From there I turned up at a 90-degree angle with all these spokes, the ones that were originally sticking out. And I wove in sideways, going around one layer per leaf. And I'd go all the way around. And then the next one up, if it was started where it was weaving under, over throughout the spokes, the next layer up is going to start under, over. So they vary every time I go up a layer, and that's what locks it in place and keeps the basket together. Kind of, common sense. Right now what I'm doing is just tucking in the rim. And, this is a pretty good sized basket. I definitely got a lot of other things to do, so I'm not going to keep going and make it much bigger. Clock's ticking, I got things to do, so I'm going to call it here. But this is a great basket. It feels really sturdy, and it's going to be a huge help to not have to carry everything in my arms anymore. All right, so this is the cholla plant, and right now there's a ton of buds coming off of these things. For the Native Americans of the Sonoran Desert, this is one of the staples to their diet. And even though it looks really scary, it's got tons of thorns on it, it's not that hard to process, and you get a lot of food out of it. So, and it actually tastes really good. So what I need to do is pull these buds off of here, collect a bunch of them, and then I just kind of roast them over the fire, and they're good to go. Before I do that, I need to make a pair of tongs, because up until this point, I've just been using 2 sticks and fumbling around with it. It's kind of a pain. So I'm just going to quickly show you how I'm going to make a pair of tongs and then go around and just fill up on these cholla buds. There we have it. Nice pair of tongs. This is going to help a lot. Instead of trying to fumble with 2 sticks like I have been, I just walk right up, grab them. I got a big bud right there. All right, it's the middle of the day. I'm avoiding the sun. There's also a huge windstorm out there, so it seems like a perfect time to process these cholla buds. So what I'm doing is taking them from my basket here. I got about a little more than half full from about 10 or 15 minutes of collecting. And you look at these things and you think there's no way you would ever want to touch them or eat them, but they're actually fantastic. And what you can do is take a couple, throw them on a flat rock like this, and you just roll them around. And a lot of the thorns are going to pop off. If not, you're going to get rid of the sharp tips on the thorns, so they just don't hurt as bad. Okay? There is a certain point where it doesn't do as much, but you do little circles. And then from there, once those thorns are kind of taken off, it's not that bad, and you can actually touch it, and it really doesn't get you. You need to remember anytime you eat anything cactusy is that they don't just have big thorns. They have these microscopic little thorns in clusters that we call glochids. So I need to make sure to get in there and get all those glochids out. But I'm just going to come in here and slowly kind of just have a nice relaxed couple hours in here and pick off a bunch of these thorns. Each one of these may take 45 seconds to a minute. So for this size, imagine in 1 hour you'd have 60 to 80 of these things, and that'd be a really good meal. So the energy that you put into this, you gain 10 times as much back by eating them. So absolutely love these things, and you should definitely learn them and process them when you're out in the desert. Here's another great edible plant that's out here, again, covered in thorns, and this is the prickly pear. It's got really big thorns coming off of it, doesn't look very inviting, and it also has all those little glochids. In my experience, those glochids don't cook out very well in a fire, and so I like to make sure to scrape them all out, cut them out, remove them, and it just takes a lot of time. But it is a good survival food. It's good to know, it's very easily identifiable, and you're not going to mess up. So what I'll do is just get my tongs, and I'll start scraping all these thorns away. I need to remember not to ever walk here again in my bare feet. But if I just scratch along the surface, a lot of these bigger thorns are going to start breaking off. All right, you get the idea. It's like thorn 400 by now. Anyway, you can see how all of those big thorns broke off. And at the base of each one of those thorns are a bunch of tiny little irritating little, I don't know if you call them thorns, but they're no good. You need to cut those out or scrape the heck out of them with your knife or on a rock, but those need to be totally gone. And then I'm going to cut around the edge, and then I fry this up on a fire and I can eat it. Again, not my favorite edible plant, but a really good survival food to know. All right, so here we go. I got the cholla buds cooking on the fire right here. They're just kind of sitting right on a not super hot bed of coals, and I'm just kind of keeping them from burning, turning them over, but making sure those glochids get really cooked. These things are delicious. I love them. Prickly pear, kind of the opposite. I'm making sure it's over some really hot coals. I don't really care if it burns a little bit as long as all of those glochids are singed. Little rat guy is on the stick that I, put a couple sticks through his abdomen area just so he doesn't flip over. And I just slowly turn him. With something like this, you want to make sure that you don't just have it on fire. You don't want to just singe and burn meat. Just have it over a hot bed of coals, and this is going to be great. Occasionally I turn it. And the big thing with this guy is that I want to make sure it's extremely well done. I know medium rare meat's much better, but if you're in a survival situation, cook everything really thoroughly. Don't take a chance that you're going to get some sort of food poisoning. All right, it's the moment of truth. Everything's cooked and I let it cool off a little bit, and it's just ready to go for the taste test. I'm excited, tons of food. My energy's been great for this entire trip so far, and I have no doubt with all these edible plants that it's going to be fairly easy to get enough calories during this trip. So let's start off with the cholla. Just take a quick look, make sure that I don't see glochids or any things that's going to stab me. I eat these all the time. I've never had a problem, but every time I'm just a little bit paranoid about it, and just make sure. Last thing I want is a mouthful of splinters. So, But this is one of my favorite foods. This is something you would eat at home. It's fantastic. Tastes like asparagus heads. So, really good stuff. Alright, I've got the thumbs up. I'm going to pound those, eat as many of those as I can possibly process for the rest of the time here. So those are already good to go. Prickly pear, yeah, it's not good. Prickly pear is your survival food. It's going to keep you going. Cooked over a campfire just doesn't taste that good. But it's good. I mean, it's fine. If you're in survival, if you're starving to death, you'd eat it. And then last but not least, here we go. This is the one I'm real excited about. I'm going to bust off his back leg. He's really well cooked. Just want to make sure. No uncooked portions in there. That's the last thing you want. Whoop. And just pull off sections of meat from his leg. Looks real good. There we go. Oh, it's fantastic. You know, once you get over the fact of what you're eating, meat's meat. It all tastes the same. So this is going to be a great meal. Really excited. Sun's going down right now. The wind's starting to pick up. It's starting to get cold, so I'm going to down a bunch of this food along with the barrel cactus fruits that I've been eating. And transfer some of these colds into my shelter and go to bed. But great day, great food. Got some big projects to work on in the morning, so I'm excited for that. All right, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 is up on my YouTube page, so check it out.